hello and welcome. Today we're not starting the 6 p.m. show as we always do with the Startup Central. In fact, we're bringing you a big ET Now exclusive. It's all happening in the telecom space. Telecom Czars Sunil Mittal and Kumar Mangalam Birla, as we speak, meeting with the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Let's bring you the footage again. That's Sunil Mittal entering North Block. That's my reporter Ashna Mishra in green and Parisha Tyagi in black and white. We'll also show you Kumar Mangalam Birla. He's also at North Block. That footage will also come up for you. Also spotted at Finance Ministry, Uday Kotak. The big story, of course, has to do with AGR, Adjusted Gross Revenues. That's Kumar Mangalam Birla wearing his poofy winter jacket, accompanied literally by Ashna Mishra and Parisha Tyagi, my colleagues who happen to be at the Finance Ministry. So the two telecom czars will be meeting with Nirmala Sitharaman. The idea, of course, being to try and find a solution to adjusted gross revenues. The damage is done. The Supreme Court has made its intentions very clear, pulled up the telecom companies as well as the government for not following its orders. Since then, you've seen the telecom companies. Vodafone Idea paid 2,500 crore rupees and Bharti Airtel paid 10,000 crore rupees. But what next? Will Vodafone Idea become a going concern? Will the government dial in with an SOS? Will it come to the rescue of the telecom companies? And that brings us to the ET Now exclusive story. We understand from our sources that the new option on the table and being discussed by the telecom czars, the Prime Minister's office, the Finance Minister, senior bureaucrats of the Finance Ministry, is to have a telecom fund of sorts. Call it a stress fund, call it an SOS fund. The idea is that if the telecom companies pay the AGR dues and how much ever they pay, that money would be put into this fund. And that money would then be given as soft loans to the telecom companies. It can be long-term loans with soft interest. The idea is to manage the cash flow of the telecom companies, to ensure that no telecom company becomes a going concern. And such a move would also be fiscally neutral for the central exchequer. It's another debate that the situation should have never come to all of this, but now that it has, this is one of the new solutions that we understand from our sources. And this is something that has been discussed at the highest level of the government, of the Modi government. The telecom czars have certainly mooted this idea. The second option, we've been hearing about this, elongate the timeline of the adjusted gross revenue dues. So paid over years, it could be 9 years, 10 years. And the government, we understand, is also going to be taking a legal opinion on waiving off the penalty as well as the interest. The third option, legislation or an ordinance to work around the Supreme Court judgment. It's ironical that the government, under a different dispensation, had introduced an ordinance to make Vodafone pay. And this government is looking at an ordinance or a legislation to actually save Vodafone. So that's the big story, the three options that are on the table. One, have a telecom fund which will give soft loans to the telecom companies and therefore make sure that nobody shuts down. This government very committed to still having three telecom companies, should not become a duopoly. Second option, we've been hearing about this. Elongate the timelines. The story we at ET Now had broken a month back. Elongate the timeline. Look at waiving of penalty and interest. Third one, introduce a legislation or an ordinance. Joining me on the phone line is Maithili Bustermath, our in-house expert, consulting editor to ET Now. Maithili, good evening. This is Nayantara Rai. It's all happening in New Delhi as we speak in North Block, and we have exclusive footage. I know you would have loved seeing it. My colleagues Ashna Mishra and Parisha Tyagi at Finance Ministry walking inside with Sunil Mittal and Kumar Mangalam Birla. They will be meeting with the Finance Minister. Of course, the agenda is to discuss the AGR mess and a fix. If I could get your reaction to the new option on the table, a fund which will give telecom companies soft loans and make sure that cash flows are managed. What do you make of this idea?
Well, given what's at stake, I think there is perhaps very little option. Unfortunately, it had to come to this pass because I think it is very clear that if the government was going to insist on the companies following what the Supreme Court had ordained, then in that case, at least one company, Vodafone Idea, would definitely have to shut shop. So in which case it would be reduced to a duopoly and with loss not only to customers, but there would definitely be loss of value, competitive value in the market. So to that extent, this makes sense. But I think when you have a stress fund, you must ensure that it doesn't entirely allowing these telecom companies to succeed, as it were. So though the stress fund can give loans, it should be on stiff terms. Agreed, today tariffs are very low in India, but it's also a fact that many of these telecom companies perhaps did not make provision for making any payment at all, initially had overbid for the earlier license rod. So there are sins of omission and commission on both sides. So while a stress fund would be good in the short term, it must ensure that it is not seen as a complete stop to telecom companies.
Maithili, hang on with us. We've also been joined by Sanjay Kapoor, telecom expert, the former CEO of Bharti Airtel. Good evening, Mr. Kapoor. This is Nayanthara Rai in New Delhi. I may say so, your old boss right now, Sunil Bharti Mittal in North Block, gone inside with Kumar Mangalam Birla. Of course, the agenda is finding a solution to adjusted gross revenues. Should have never reached to this level, but it has now, with fears of one telecom company at least shutting down. Bharti Airtel perhaps, also looking at ways and how it can invest, participate in a 5G auction. You've got ancillary businesses that could be shut down, SIM card dealers, billboard guys, advertising revenues. It's a colossal mess with what's happening. What do you make of this idea, this new idea on the table, a telecom fund to give soft loans?
Nayanthara, good evening. At this stage, let's not talk about, why is it coming so late or why has government taken so much time. I think what is important to discuss is that there seems to be a solution under the current circumstances. And any solution, any bailout for the telecom sector to not get converted to a duopoly should be a welcome step. I totally agree with the lady who spoke before me that any such fund should be seen as a very definitive idea where there should be proper guidelines as to where this money can be used and for how long. And this cannot be for perpetuity. This has to be a short-term bailout. However, some other measures like giving them a long rope to return the dues, if any, to the government should be there. And also see what can be done on waiver of penalties and the interest on interest, etc., etc. So I think clearly the government is realized, and I'm sure they knew it earlier. We can't forget that there was a bailout for telecom with NTP 1999, and it was the same government that was in power. And this industry would have died long back if that bailout wouldn't have happened. So I'm glad that bailout is back on the table, and we will not have to probably move towards a duopoly, which will have a cascade effect, not only on the one operator that went down, but it would have an impact on the whole ecosystem, which includes tower companies, which includes active infrastructure companies, which includes all the ecosystem partners like content providers, like digital solution providers, device manufacturers, everybody. So I think it's a colossal loss which will get saved if we don't really let this go down, let this one company go down.
Stay with us, Mr. Kapoor. I'm also being joined by former Telecom Secretary, R.C. Chandrasekhar. Sir, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks so much for joining us here in ET Now. If you're not watching the screens at the moment, let me tell you what's happening. Sunil Bharti Mittal and Kumar Mangalam Birla are at the Finance Ministry. We've got exclusive footage to that. My reporters Ashna Mishra and Parisha Tyagi there, meeting with the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Of course, they're discussing adjusted gross revenues, a situation we all find ourselves in, the fears of one giant, Vodafone Idea, becoming a going concern, which will have a cascading impact on the entire ecosystem as well as the consumers. There seems to be a new solution on the table, an option that is being discussed, and we at ET Now have exclusive access to that, exclusive access to this information. That what's being discussed by the Prime Minister's office, the Finance Ministry and the telecom companies, the bigwigs, the chiefs of these telecom companies, is a fund, a telecom fund. I don't want to call it left hand to right hand, but the idea basically is that the payments made by the telecom companies as AGR would then be advanced back to the telecom companies in the form of soft loans. It could be soft interest, it could be long-term loans at a soft interest. What do you make of this idea? The idea is, of course, to have a stress fund, manage cash flows, be fiscally neutral to the central exchequer, but more importantly, you also save the telcos.
Good evening, Nentara, and to your viewers. I've just been hearing the last part of this program, but I think first and foremost, the good thing is that I think the gravity of the situation has been well appreciated. And obviously, while the case was going on in the Supreme Court, it was perhaps even more difficult for the government to intervene. But now that that has reached finality, the solution parameters are clear from at least what is the exact problem that needs to be solved. I think that it's good that a solution actually is being sought, which would prevent the sector from descending into a duopoly and a stressed, at least one of them also perhaps still facing some stress. The question, of course, will be, on the exact details of how any such solution would operate, because the liabilities from each of the companies are vastly different. And, in what manner exactly this fund will be used and how it will be apportioned and what it can be used for and can't be used for, and whether that relief will be sufficient to enable the telcos to actually not only become going concerns, but be in a position to invest on growth and new technologies going forward. But I'm sure that, when once all of these questions are addressed, taken on frontally, then some solution can be arrived at, which would, A, satisfy the implementation of the Supreme Court order and at the same time enable the companies to survive without going under the weight of this burden. Whether the amounts will be related to the fees which have to be paid and to the penalties and interest and so on, and over what period that will need to be repaid, all of these I think will be very, very important questions that will determine the effectiveness of this solution, because it might be a solution, but for it to be effective, I think the company has to be an active participant in the telecom space, providing not just services to the consumers, but also continuing to grow and modernize. That's critical for the country, for the consumers, and for digital India, and also for the government's own revenues in the future.
I take your point, and I want to come, and this is all being discussed, that if you have any one of them shutting down, the loss of jobs, the ancillary businesses, advertising revenues, SIM card dealers, the impact that this is going to have, and of course on the banks, can they really afford to take a big hit like this? We've already seen credit offtake being as bad as it is. Sanjay Kapoor, I call it ironical, but under the UPA and with Pranab Mukherjee as the finance minister, we had seen an ordinance to make Vodafone pay. Today, in 2020, the Modi government has also got another option on the table, which is an ordinance or a legislation to save Vodafone. Things have really come round to that. What, according to you, is the best solution? And especially, don't forget the kind of commentary that we've seen from the Supreme Court. Would it be okay with the contract being changed? Would it be okay with the waiver of the penalty and the interest on interest and all of that? What, according to you, is the best way out?
We need to actually split the problem into two. One is to take care and bridge the amount which is required to keep one of the companies as a going concern, and that requires additional funds to come to them or their penalties and interest to vanish. Either of the two has to be done to make sure there are adequate monies available to meet the obligations of the Supreme Court verdict, right? So that has to be bridged, for which already we have discussed that there's a stress fund, there could be an ordinance passed, there also could be some waiver, etc., etc. But the long-term problem still doesn't go away. We have a problem on the share economics of this industry going forward. The problem is that the rates that we charge in this country are far too less compared to any part of the world when our costs are not majorly different from other parts of the world. The second problem, which is not the operator problem, but the government problem, is that the total taxes that the government collects from telecommunications in one form or the other is close to about 30% of their top line. Is this a sustainable tax regime, or this needs to undergo a change so that the same problem doesn't carry forward into the future? And finally, the raw material, which is spectrum, is the lifeline of this industry. If the price of spectrum is going to be 6 times, 7 times, 10 times higher than the rest of the world, how do you expect an Indian operator to provide the right services by getting the right amount of spectrum and also making sure that he is affordable and is able to cater to over 1 billion people in the country? Now, till this equation is set right for future, this problem could reoccur a few years from now or a couple of years from now, which we don't want. And the third problem, which is very important, the world is now going through a transformation from 4G to 5G. And this transformation is not incremental in nature. It's a real transformation. If we don't catch the 5G bandwagon, we will not be able to catch the 6G train. It'll be impossible. And the amount of spectrum that you require for 5G is about 100 megs per operator. With the current reserve price, you need to spend about 50,000 crores. And the densification of the networks, because it's a zero latency or a very low latency solution, will have to, really transform the existing networks to become exceedingly dense, especially indoors, which will require a huge amount of capital to go, and also fiberization of the networks, which is very, very low right now. We have to cater to the future as well. We can take care of this problem. I'm glad we are taking care of the problem.
I take that point, Sanjay Kapoor. In fact, and R. Chandrasekhar, if I could take that to you now, look at the kind of payments that the government is demanding. What the Supreme Court has had to say, you've seen a token amount that has, of course, been paid, 2,500 crores by Vodafone Idea, 10,000 crore rupees by Bharti Airtel. In an interview to me last week, the TRAI chairman, the telecom regulator, has been very adamant that there's no reason to revise the 5G auction prices. I mean, it's all to, we won't know, we don't have a crystal ball, but I think it's an educated guess that the 5G auction perhaps is not going to be a success. It could lean towards a failure if that kind of a reserve price does stay. And that's the point that Sanjay Kapoor was also talking about, how we need to go back and plow back into the infrastructure, move on with the future and all of that. But come in on this. What, according to you, is the best solution? You really can't have a Vodafone Idea shut down. It's going to be absolutely disastrous for the economy, for the banks, and what is going to do to the economy after that as well?
Well, Anantara, I think it is now very clear that incremental solutions will not work. I think Sanjay Kapoor also mentioned about the acuteness of the problem. I think what we are seeing is an acid test that the government of the day is being put to, as accumulation of a number of problems which have accumulated over the years and which have come to a culmination today. So, in short, I think what the basic point that I'm trying to drive at is that in the National Digital Communications Policy, there is one line which is now approved policy of the country, which says that the government will prioritize universal coverage over revenue maximization. Now you are at a point where you are being put to the test on how far you are willing to go to actually fulfill that commitment and what it takes. It's not easy. I don't think it can be anybody's case that it is easy. It's extremely difficult for the government to give up a major source of revenue to which it has got used to over the years. But if you're going to change the paradigm, then this is the time to do it, because if you don't do it now, it can't be done later. And unless that is done, I think the long-term revival of the health of the sector as a whole, not an individual company, not one company or the other, that is not going to happen, and the problem will keep surfacing. While the prices may be low or unsustainable, I don't think that, the government or the regulator should get too involved in regulating the prices. That has a different set of issues associated with it. But I think once the government moderates its hunger for revenues, direct revenues from the sector, and focuses on the indirect revenues that result from the kind of economic expansion and the kind of digital economy that grows around it, I think it will compensate itself in very different ways. So we are talking about changing the paradigm altogether and making a clean break from the paradigm of the past, which concentrated and focused on the direct revenues from the sector instead of focusing on the indirect revenue growth because of economic, growth and economic development arising from the digital infrastructure and the digital economy.
Okay, with that, gentlemen, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here on ET Now with this breaking story. We're, of course, on standby for when Sunil Mittal and Kumar Mangalam Birla leave North Block. We've, of course, got exclusive footage of them entering the building to meet with the Finance Minister, Nirmala Sitharaman. In fact, Uday Kotak was also spotted by my colleagues at North Block. That's exclusive footage for you. We've been playing it in a loop. Two Telco Czars. We've come together this evening to meet with the Finance Minister to discuss the burning issue of AGR. No one in the ecosystem wants any telecom company to shut down. It's going to be absolutely disastrous. We'll take a short commercial break.